Hey, this is Chris. Welcome back to another episode of San Diego's Historic Backcountry. In this video, I wanted to show you a really interesting spot, very unique place in the backcountry where several generations of road, a couple of wagon roads to begin with, and then a couple of versions of Highway 80 cross a creek in the same place, and there's sort of remnants of each of the generations of roads still visible there. Quite an interesting little spot. Where we're going to be in this video is Cottonwood Creek, east of Pine Valley. Cottonwood Creek comes down out of the Laguna Mountains and drops down, sort of heads to the south, and it's going to go to Lake Marina is where it's going to go, down through Barrett Junction, and basically becomes a Tijuana River. But what we're looking at is along Old Highway 80, east of Pine Valley, but still west of Buckman Springs Road, along in the canyon there. So just to show a more detailed view of what bridge we're talking about here, going eastbound down Old Highway 80 in the canyon, it's this bridge right here. Doesn't look like much from above, but it does from underneath. And then coming the other way, this is coming back up the canyon, headed toward Pine Valley, and we're going to drive across our little Cottonwood Creek bridge right here. You can see the old railings on it. So we'll be taking a much more detailed look at this area. So we're going to start out by looking at our wagon road. This is going to be a very heavily used road between about the 1860s and up until about probably 1916 or so, when it was washed out in the 1916 floods. This is it closer to Pine Valley. Nice little road piece in here. These roads tended to be fairly well built, but they tended to have some pretty steep hills on them. The bridges were fairly simple on these roads. They either didn't have one, if the creek was small enough, they just went down through the drainage up the other side, or they would build a small wooden bridge, which sometimes later had concrete footings, which is what we're going to see over here at Cottonwood Creek. So here I'm standing right by the Highway 80 bridge, looking across the Cottonwood Creek, and you see those old stone walls over there. That's our wagon road again, as it's coming down the far side. Now, I think what happened here is that's an earlier version of the wagon road that's already crossed the creek, probably without a bridge, a few hundred feet upstream. And here we are now walking that stretch. You can see it's got a rock wall on the edge here. I think what this one did was it crossed the creek further up and came down the east bank here already. And what they're going to do is, at a later point, is they're going to build a nice bridge across the creek instead of using just the splash through kind of ford that this road had. And then that later road with the bridge is going to stay on the other side of the creek and go down across about where Highway 80 did later on. So I believe this is the earlier version of the road, kind of the simpler version that then got replaced, which is what we're going to see as we get over under the current highway bridge as well. And then turning around, you can see the Highway 80 bridge over there in the distance. I'm standing on that earlier wagon road, with showing the rock walls and everything along the edge. This is fairly easy to see from the highway, where the later version of the wagon road you actually cannot see from the highway. It's going to be sort of underneath the highway bridge over there. So this is more noticeable over on this side. And as we get down closer to the creek, this is one of the stone bridge abutments from the wagon road bridge. It's more obvious on this side. This is kind of the east side of the creek. This one's in better shape than the one on the other side. There's a bit more fallen down, but you see how well built this was. A lot of rock work went into this, and there's a lot of heavy grading on the wagon roads back then as well. So, and then the Highway 80 bridge you can see behind the trees there in the distance. So this is right down by the creek, and this has some more features down actually in the bed of the creek that we'll look at next here. So down actually in the bed of the creek, we have two of these large concrete footings. You can see a little bolt sticking out the top. These are probably a bit later. This may either be a bridge from the 1890s, 1900 period, or it could be a rebuild of an earlier bridge from a few years earlier that then got better concrete footings on it. But the concrete's a little bit late for wagon road footings. But this is definitely wagon road, and this is probably the road that got washed out in the 1916 floods in the backcountry, and that's why in 1917 they're going to replace it with the first automobile road. Okay, so leaving our wagon road footings down here in the creek, let's turn around and take a look at the auto road bridges, because there's something very unique going on here. This would be one bridge above the other one, so quite an interesting situation. The lower bridge that's been sort of roofed over is going to be the 1917 auto highway bridge. So what we're seeing underneath that later bridge is one of the 4 1917 state highway bridges. This is the one here at Los Terrenitos. It's still out in the open. The other one that's still standing is at Pine Valley. It's the old Pine Creek Bridge. That's a real nice bridge on there. Heads to the leads to the horse stables now. The other 1917 one. Then we have the Cottonwood Creek one that we're seeing underneath the bridge, and then the other one was Kitchen Creek, and it was replaced about 20 or 30 years ago. So looking back again at our 1917 bridge that's hiding underneath the 1928 bridge, you can see what they did was they just sort of jackhammered off the guardrails that used to be on the bridge, and they just built the new bridge deck right over the top of it, leaving a bit of a gap in between. So years ago, when I was first really looking at in detail at old Highway 80, it was my historian friend Steve Varner who had said to me one time, "Hey, have you ever looked underneath the later Cottonwood Creek Highway 80 bridge to see what's underneath? The old bridge is still underneath there." And I hadn't at that point, so I went and climbed around, and sure enough, it's underneath there. So thanks to Steve years ago for pointing this out to me. Getting down into this area underneath these bridges isn't particularly easy, by the way. If you think, oh, I'll go for a little Sunday stroll and go hike around under the bridges, it's a bit of a slide and a bushwhacking experience to get down here underneath these bridges. So better seen from above if you can. You can peer over the edge and try to see, or walk that little piece of the wagon road on the far side of the creek over there and look back underneath the bridges. You can see it that way, but actually getting down underneath here is a bit of a rock scramble and a stickery bushwhack to get down in there. So the 1917 bridge was actually a pretty well built bridge. You see underneath here, looking up at it, a lot of concrete went into the bridge. Probably wasn't wide enough to meet federal standards by the time they were placed in 1928. May have been having some other issues by then as well, I don't know. So now going back up on the current road level and checking out the 1928 bridge, it's really kind of striking how simple this bridge looks from up above when you realize now what's underneath it. A whole other bridge and old wagon road abutments right next to it and everything. Really simple looking up here, but it's actually quite a bit taller above the creek than you'd think it is too. It kind of looks like a culvert almost when you're driving over it. But then when you get down underneath there and look up, you realize this is probably 30 feet off the creek at least. And then from the bridge here looking back across, there's our early wagon road, the one that either didn't have a bridge or had a very simple bridge coming down the other side of the canyon already over there. And then that later wagon road would join it just beyond where the Highway 80 bridge is. So this is a neat area in here with a lot going on. Basically 4 generations of the road all meeting in the same place right in here on Cottonwood Creek. And then we can finish out our look at the Cottonwood Creek Bridge here by walking on the other side. This outer side of the curve got these metal and new concrete guardrails put on it just within the last few years to make it more collision resistant, kind of bounce off instead of snagging a front of a car on the end of the old bridge railing there. It makes it more of a bounce off situation. So anyway, I'd like to thank you for coming along at our look at the historic Cottonwood Creek road crossings. Basically 4 different generations in there: early wagon road, a later wagon road, a 1917 bridge, and the 1928 bridge. Looking over the beautiful wooded Cottonwood Creek drainage east of Pine Valley. So I'd like to thank you again for coming along in another video, and I will see you in the next one.